Snow blankets the northern plains. Wind cuts across open grassland, driving temperatures far below zero.
Yet beneath a massive earthen dome, 20 people sleep in comfort.
Here, in the quiet embrace of the earth, we find our rest.
Engineered into a system so precise that 18th century European visitors stepped inside and called it an oven.
This wasn't luck. Across North America, from Arctic coasts to desert plateaus,
Through thermal engineering that rivaled anything their era produced, they understood what cold truly was.
not an enemy to fight with brute force, but a physical problem with architectural solutions.
Each shelter type, including earth lodges, hide teepees, snow igloos, and sunken pit houses, represented a different answer
To the same question, how do you trap heat when you have no metal, no glass, no fossil fuels? The answer lay in exploiting the physics of materials most would consider inadequate. Packed snow became insulation. Buffalo hides turned into dead-air thermal barriers. The soil transformed into thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it through the cold nights. Every element had a job. Every design choice solved a specific problem in the relentless war against heat loss. Start with the simplest physics problem. A fire produces heat, but some of it escapes.
Through walls, through roofs, through every crack and seam.
The moment warmth radiates outward, cold rushes in to take its place. So the first engineering challenge wasn't creating heat, it was trapping it. On the northern plains, tribes built structures that functioned like thermal batteries. An earth lodge began as a circular pit, dug shallow into the ground. We select the longest branches first, weaving them tightly into the frame. This creates the tension needed for the structure. Across the wooden skeleton, they layered willow branches, prairie grass, and finally, a foot-thick cap of sod. That soil layer wasn't decoration. Earth is dense.
Dense materials absorb heat slowly and release it slowly, a property called thermal mass.
During the day, when the central fire burned steadily, the thick earthen walls soaked up warmth. At night, when the fire died to coals, those same walls radiated stored heat back into the interior.
The lodge became a thermal flywheel, smoothing out temperature swings. Snow drifting onto the roof only improved performance. Fresh snow is mostly trapped air, millions of tiny pockets that resist heat flow. The same principle that makes modern foam insulation work.
But thick walls created a new problem: smoke.
A family can't breathe wood smoke for 6 months straight.
The solution was precise ventilation engineering.
At the lodge's peak, builders left a circular opening just large enough to vent fumes.
They placed an inverted bullboat, a wooden frame covered in hide, over the smoke hole.
This cover acted like a chimney cap, deflecting wind and preventing downdrafts, while still allowing smoke to escape upward.
Inside, the spatial arrangement multiplied efficiency. Families slept on raised wooden platforms built along the walls. 2 feet above the packed earth floor.
Cold air sinks.
By sleeping elevated, occupants stayed in the warmest thermal layer, while frigid air pooled harmlessly below. Each platform was heaped with buffalo robes, moss padding, and woven reed mats, layers that trapped body heat close to the sleeper. Up to 20 relatives shared a single lodge. This wasn't just a cultural preference, it was a thermal strategy. Human bodies radiate heat.
A sleeping person produces roughly the same amount of warmth as a 100-watt light bulb. 20 people together generated 2,000 watts of continuous heat, even without a fire.
In the compact volume of an earth lodge, this collective warmth significantly raised interior temperatures. The human mass itself became part of the heating system.
Archaeological evidence demonstrates the seriousness with which builders approached heat management.
Researchers have found fire pits lined with reflective stones, positioned to bounce radiant heat towards sleeping areas. As the alpenglow fades, the warmth of the lodge beckons. Here, time slows, and every comfort is considered.
Angled to push warmth forward, rather than letting it escape through the back wall. Every detail served a purpose.
Moving the dwelling required synchronized effort. Step by step, they traversed the landscape, the golden hour light illuminating their path and their resolve.
Mobile hunters needed shelters they could dismantle and carry. So they engineered a different solution, the teepee.
A teepee looks simple. A cone of poles covered in sewn hides.
The beauty of the saddle stitch lies in its simplicity and strength. Each pass of the needle locks the thread in place, ensuring a lifetime of use.
In summer, a single layer of buffalo skin kept rain out while allowing airflow.
In winter, builders added a second inner lining.
Hoisted inside the frame several inches from the outer wall.
This created a dead air gap, a pocket of still air trapped between two barriers.
Still air is a terrible conductor of heat.
That's why birds fluff their feathers in cold weather, trapping air close to their skin.
Thereby maintaining their body temperature. The double-walled teepee exploited the same principle.
Heat from the interior fire couldn't reach the frozen outer hide because it had to cross an insulating air gap first.
Meanwhile, the inner lining absorbed radiant warmth and re-radiated it back toward the occupants.
At the base, builders banked snow against the outer hide, plugging drafts and adding another layer of insulation. The teepee became a thermal envelope with multiple defense layers. An outer hide, dead air, an inner lining, and finally,
the warm core where people lived. Smoke management followed a different logic than in earth lodges. At the cone's apex, 2 adjustable flaps extended like wings. By moving these smoke ears with exterior poles, occupants could redirect the vent opening away from prevailing winds. On calm nights, the flaps opened wide to allow for free venting. During windstorms, they closed partially to prevent backdrafts that would fill the interior with smoke.
An experimental study directly tested the teepee's thermal performance. Researchers placed temperature sensors throughout a traditional winter teepee during freezing weather. They found that occupants sitting near the fire felt as warm as people in oil-heated modern homes. Not because the teepee generated more heat, but because each person occupied only a tenth of the space.
The compact volume meant body heat and fire had nowhere to escape.
The warmth begins to spread through my fingers. Soothing, isn't it?
But this created a final engineering challenge.
How to sleep comfortably when fire and smoke competed for breathable air. The answer was layering bedding with the same care as walls. Buffalo robes went fur-side down on the ground, trapping warmth against the earth. More robes piled on top, fur-side up, creating a nest that insulated sleepers from below and above.
Hunters wrapped themselves in additional hides at night, forming individual thermal cocoons.
Inside these layered wrappings, body heat had nowhere to go. Even as the fire died overnight, sleepers stayed warm through dawn.
Far to the west, Pacific Northwest tribes faced different winters.
Wetter, windier, but less brutally cold than the plains.
Their solution was to go underground. Hupa, Salish, and Maka builders excavated floors 1 to 2 meters deep.
Then raised walls of split cedar planks and covered them with earth.
The ground itself became insulation.
Soil temperature at depth stays relatively constant year-round, buffered from surface weather swings. By sinking floors below the frost line, pit houses tapped into this natural thermal stability. Walls surrounded by banked earth couldn't lose heat to outside air because they had no direct contact with it. The structure became thermally coupled to the ground mass, which acted as a giant heat reservoir. In the arid southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built thick-walled rooms from adobe.
A mixture of mud and straw shaped into bricks.
Adobe walls, 2 feet thick, took hours to heat fully.
But once warmed, they released that heat slowly throughout the night.
The material's high thermal mass created a time delay effect, shifting the day's warmth into evening hours when it was needed most. In the Cherokee territories of the Southeast, winter houses were ingeniously designed with remarkable efficiency.
These small, round structures, often just 12 feet across, used wattle and daub walls, woven branches plastered with clay and packed earth.
The walls were thick, but the volume was tiny, meaning a small fire could heat the entire space rapidly.
Archaeological excavations have revealed an innovation that further enhanced efficiency. Some winter houses had limestone slabs embedded in the floor hearths.
Builders would heat these stones in the fire until they glowed orange, then bank coals around them. The limestone absorbed tremendous heat and released it gradually over hours, a built-in thermal battery. Long after the flames died, the floor remained warm enough to sleep on comfortably. 18th century European traders who visited Cherokee winter houses reported being overwhelmed by the intense heat within. They described stepping from freezing outdoor air into a room so warm they had to remove layers of clothing. The Cherokee could maintain these temperatures with just a handful of coals, because the tight volume, thick walls, and heated stones, each element amplified the others. However, perhaps the most counterintuitive thermal engineering was observed in the Arctic, where Inuit builders constructed homes from frozen water itself. An igloo is a dome of snow blocks, assembled in a rising spiral until the final keystone block locks the structure in place.
It seems impossible. How can ice provide warmth?
The answer is air. Snow that's been compacted into blocks contains countless tiny air pockets trapped between ice crystals. These pockets resist heat flow, just as the dead air gap in a double-walled teepee does. The snow block becomes a cellular insulation material, holding warmth inside while keeping the brutal cold outside. Inuit builders exploited two additional physics principles. First, they cut a low entrance tunnel, often descending below floor level before rising back up into the main chamber. Cold air is denser than warm air, so it tends to sink. The tunnel design trapped frigid outdoor air in the entrance while keeping warmer air inside the dome. Second, they cut a small vent hole in the dome's peak. This served the same function as an Earth Lodge smoke hole, venting stale air and combustion products without dumping all the interior heat. The vent could be plugged partially with a chunk of clear ice, allowing light in while minimizing heat loss. Inside, Inuit families would briefly light a seal oil lamp or a small fire. The heat from this flame would melt the innermost layer of snow slightly. As the interior warmed, that thin melt layer would refreeze into a smooth ice glaze. This glaze actually strengthened the structure while sealing tiny gaps that might allow warm air to leak. Temperature measurements inside occupied igloos show the dramatic effect. When outside air plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, interior temperatures could rise to near freezing.
A 40-degree difference created by snow, body heat, and a small flame. If the occupants added thick caribou skin linings to the walls, interior temperatures could climb to 10 or even 20 degrees Celsius. The igloo wasn't just a shelter from the wind. It was a functional thermal environment.
Researchers studying igloo physics found that the snow dome's geometry matters as much as its material. A hemisphere is the strongest possible shape for its weight, meaning thin walls can span large spaces without collapsing. But more importantly, a dome has minimal surface area for its enclosed volume. Since heat escapes through surfaces, reducing the surface area relative to the interior space cuts down on heat loss. The igloo's shape itself was thermally optimized. Yet none of these shelters worked in isolation. Winter survival required integrating architecture, clothing, bedding, fuel management, and group behavior into a cohesive system.
Clothing followed the same thermal principles as buildings.
Multiple layers of tanned hide, worn fur side in, trapped warm air against the skin.
Outer garments shed wind and moisture, while inner layers provided insulation. Boots were stuffed with dried grass or moss, natural materials that trapped air and wicked moisture away from feet. Inside shelters, bedding multiplied warmth retention.
Buffalo robes, bear furs, woven blankets, and goose down quilts layered atop one another, creating thermal nests.
Families often hung extra hides from rafters to partition sleeping areas, creating smaller, warm pockets within the larger structure.
Fuel management required year-round planning. Plains tribes cut and stacked firewood in early spring when the wood was dry. Arctic hunters cached driftwood and seal blubber throughout the brief summer.
The goal wasn't massive, roaring fires, those wasted fuel and overheated small spaces. Instead, families maintained small, steady fires that produced consistent warmth over hours. Some groups used reflector techniques to multiply fire efficiency.
Flat stones stacked behind a hearth would absorb radiant heat and bounce it forward into the living space.
Communal sleeping meant bodies pressed close together, exchanging warmth and comfort. Elders often received the warmest sleeping spots, closest to the fire, deepest in the bedding. As a mark of respect, and as practical recognition that older bodies struggled more with cold,
children slept between adults, protected from temperature extremes.
Winter was also a time for concentrated indoor activities. Storytelling, tool-making, hide tanning, and ceremonial gatherings kept people moving and generating body heat.
These weren't just cultural practices, they were thermal strategies. An active person produces more heat than someone sitting still.
Shelter placement itself showed environmental sophistication.
Plains teepees traditionally faced east, orienting entrances away from prevailing westerly winds while capturing morning sunlight.
Earth lodges were often built in river valleys, where bluffs blocked the worst wind. Pit houses were positioned on south-facing slopes to maximize solar gain. Villages clustered shelters close together, creating windbreaks and allowing families to share resources. If one household's fire died overnight, neighbors could quickly provide coals to restart it.
Proximity meant that knowledge spread.
If one builder discovered a better smoke hole design or bedding arrangement, others could adopt it the following season. This knowledge accumulation happened across generations. Children watched parents assemble lodges and learned the precise angle for stacking sod or the correct tension for stretching hide. Elders passed down weather lore, which included knowing which wind directions signaled coming storms, when to bank extra snow against walls. The engineering wasn't written in manuals. It lived in practiced hands and observant minds. When European settlers first encountered these winter housing systems, many were astonished.
German-Russian immigrants arriving in North Dakota immediately recognized Mandan earth lodges as equivalent to their own thick-walled northern European homes. They understood that deep earth insulation was high-quality engineering, not a primitive improvisation. Yet other colonists dismissed indigenous architecture as crude, precisely because it used materials they considered inferior. They couldn't see past the lack of metal nails or glass windows to recognize the sophisticated thermal physics at work.
It took modern researchers, equipped with thermometers and controlled experiments, to quantify what indigenous builders had known empirically.
That these structures achieved thermal performance comparable to or exceeding that of contemporary European housing.
The experimental teepee study, which showed warmth equivalent to that of oil-heated homes, was particularly revealing. It demonstrated that comfort isn't about energy input. It's about energy retention. A modern furnace produces vastly more heat than a teepee fire, but if that heat escapes through poor insulation, the occupants still feel cold.